The marketplace was loud, filled with voices shouting prices, smells of roasted meat, and the clang of metal tools. Alien traders stood behind stalls, selling strange fruits, weapons, and even caged animals. But at the far end, hidden in the shadows, there was one cage different from the rest. Inside it sat a small alien girl, her knees pulled to her chest, thin arms wrapped around herself. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her big eyes looked empty. Dust and dirt covered her hair, and her clothes were little more than torn fabric. Hanging off her shoulders, most people didn't even look at her. Those who did only laughed or shook their heads. "She's no good," one merchant said to another. "Weak and sick, won't last the week," the other trader chuckled. "No one will waste credits on that one." But one man stopped. He was human, tall, wearing a worn brown jacket and heavy boots. His name was Ethan. He had been walking through the market looking for ship parts. But something made him glance toward the far corner. And when he did, his eyes locked on the girls for a moment. The noise of the market seemed to fade. The girl didn't move, but her gaze followed him. There was no anger, no hope, just a quiet acceptance, as if she had already given up Ethan's. Brow furrowed, he stepped closer to the cage, his boots crunching against the dirt floor. The trader sitting beside her cage raised an eyebrow. "You interested in this one?" he asked with a smirk. "She's damaged goods, human, waste of your money." Ethan didn't answer right away. He crouched down to see her better. "Can you talk?" he asked softly. The girl blinked slowly, but said nothing. The trader laughed. "See, she's useless. Can't work, can't fight, doesn't even speak your language." Ethan straightened, his jaw tightening. "How much?" he asked. The trader stared at him like he had gone mad. "You serious?" Ethan's voice was steady. "How much?" The trader shrugged. 100 credits. "And she's yours." "That's less than a meal in this market." Ethan pulled a small pouch from his jacket, counted out the credits, and handed them over. The trader snorted, shaking his head. "Your loss, human." The lock clicked open, and the cage door creaked as Ethan pulled it wide. The girl didn't move at first. Ethan crouched again, holding out his hand. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting his again. She hesitated, then placed her small, cold hand in his. Ethan gently pulled her out, wrapping his old coat around her shoulders. The market crowd barely noticed as he walked away, carrying her like she weighed nothing. She was so light it felt like carrying a bundle of rags. Her head rested weakly against his chest. "Don't worry," he murmured. "You're safe now." But as they left the market stalls behind, Ethan noticed something. 2 large figures were moving in the same direction behind them. At first, he thought it was coincidence, but every time he turned a corner, they followed. One was tall and thin, with glowing red eyes. The other heavy-set with spiked armor. Ethan's grip on the girl tightened. She stirred slightly, but didn't speak. He kept walking, faster now, weaving through the crowd. The sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. A voice called out, deep and rough, "Hey, human, stop." Ethan didn't stop. He turned down a narrow alley, hoping to lose them. The girl's small fingers clutched the fabric of his jacket. The alley twisted between old stone walls, shadows stretching across their path, but the footsteps followed, faster now. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. Both figures were closing in. "Why are they after us?" he muttered under his breath. The girl's eyes flickered with something fear. The end of the alley came into view. It was a dead end. Ethan stopped, his mind racing. The girl looked up at him for the first time since leaving the cage. Her lips parted, and in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear, she whispered, "They want me back." Before Ethan could answer, a shadow fell over them. A hand, massive and clawed, landed on his shoulder. The deep voice growled, You took something that doesn't belong to you. Asterisk, Ethan turned slowly, his eyes meeting the tall alien with the glowing red eyes. The second one, the heavy-set alien with spiked armor, blocked the alley behind them. There was no way out. The small alien girl clung to his coat, her breathing quick and shallow. She's ours, the tall alien said, his voice cold. Property of the Eastern traders. Ethan's jaw tightened. She's not property, he replied, keeping his voice calm. I bought her fair from the market. The heavy-set alien laughed, the sound deep and cruel. You think that matters? He said, you took her, now you pay. Ethan glanced around, searching for any chance to escape. The walls were too high to climb, and the passage was too narrow for a fight without risking the girl. He shifted his weight, stepping slightly sideways, placing himself between the girl and the two aliens. I'm walking out of here with her, Ethan said quietly. The tall alien stepped forward, his long fingers curling into claws. Not without losing something first, he hissed. The moment his hand reached out, Ethan moved. He pushed the girl behind him and lunged, shoving the tall alien back with his shoulder. The heavy-set one roared and charged, but Ethan ducked, grabbing a loose metal pipe from the ground. The swing was fast and hard, connecting with the alien's knee. The heavy alien stumbled, howling in pain. Run, Ethan shouted to the girl. She hesitated only a moment before darting down the alley's side opening, a small gap Ethan had noticed earlier. Ethan followed, his boots pounding against the dusty ground. Shouts and curses followed them, along with the sound of pursuit. They burst out into the wider street, where crowds moved like flowing water. Ethan scooped the girl back into his arms to move faster. Weaving between merchants and shoppers, his heart pounded, but his grip stayed firm. The girl's eyes were wide and her small hands clung to his jacket with desperate strength. Finally, the market noise faded behind them. Ethan ducked into a quiet side street, pressing his back against a wall to catch his breath. The girl looked at him, her lips trembling. Why? Why help me? She asked in a soft, broken voice. Ethan gave her a faint smile, because no one else would. She stared at him for a moment before looking away, her eyes filling with something he couldn't quite read, fear, maybe disbelief. Ethan adjusted his coat around her shoulders. You're freezing, he muttered. We need to get you somewhere warm. He started walking toward the edge of the district, where his small transport ship was docked. The streets here were quieter, lined with old buildings and flickering lamps. But every few minutes, Ethan glanced back over his shoulder. The two aliens were nowhere in sight, yet he knew they wouldn't give up so easily. Halfway to the ship, the girl's breathing slowed, her head resting against his chest. Her small frame felt lighter than ever. You need food, water, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. The girl whispered something so faint Ethan had to lean closer. They'll keep coming, Ethan frowned. Who? She looked up, her eyes sharp despite her weak voice. The ones who had me. The traders, the buyers, they don't like losing. Her words were followed by silence, heavy and tense. By the time they reached the docking area, night was creeping in. The cold air stung against Ethan's skin. He climbed the ramp into his ship, setting the girl down gently on a seat in the small cabin. She winced when she moved, and Ethan noticed marks on her wrist. Steep, old scars from restraints. I'll get you some water, he said, turning to the supply locker. But as he reached for a bottle, a faint metallic clink sounded outside. Ethan froze, the girl's head lifted, her eyes alert. They found us, she whispered. Ethan moved to the cockpit window, peering out into the shadows near the dock. Two dark shapes stood at the edge of the landing pad. Even in the dim light, he saw the red glow of alien eyes. The heavy-set silhouette stepped forward, and the faint light caught the spikes on his armor. Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't take off yet. The ship needed a few minutes to power up. He looked back at the girl. "Stay quiet. Stay low," he said. His voice firm, but gentle. She nodded, curling up on the seat, her eyes following him. Outside, footsteps echoed against the metal surface of the dock. They were coming closer. Ethan's hand hovered near the blaster at his hip. Every muscle in his body was tense. The girl's breathing grew quick again. The first shadow passed beneath the ship's light, revealing a cruel smile. The tall alien's voice carried through the cold air. "You can't hide from us, human. Give her back. And maybe we let you live." Ethan's reply was steady. "You'll have to kill me first." The air seemed to hold still for a heartbeat. Then came the sound of heavy boots rushing forward. Ethan stepped into the ship's entryway, ready for whatever came next. The sound of pounding boots on metal echoed through the dock. Ethan's heartbeat quickened, but his mind stayed sharp. He slammed the control panel beside the door, sealing it shut. The hiss of the locking mechanism was followed by heavy fists. Hammering against the outside, the girl sat curled on the seat. Her eyes wide. "They won't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan moved quickly to the cockpit, flicking switches to start the ship's engines. The old transport rumbled, lights flickering across the dashboard. He could feel the vibration under his boots, but he knew it still needed time to be ready for takeoff. A loud, metallic clang rang from the side of the ship. Ethan glanced at the security monitor. One of the aliens was trying to cut through the hull with a plasma blade. The other was moving toward the ship's landing gear. "They're trying to disable us," Ethan muttered. Grabbing his blaster from the holster, he turned to the girl. "Stay low. Stay hidden," he said firmly. Her small hands gripped the edge of the seat, and she nodded, slipping down onto the floor. Ethan hit the emergency hatch control, the small side ramp lowering with a hiss. Cold night air swept in as he stepped outside, blaster in hand. The tall alien with the glowing red eyes turned at the sound, his mouth curled into a grin. "Brave human," he sneered, "but foolish." Ethan fired first. A bolt of blue light cutting through the dark, forcing the alien to dive for cover. The heavy-set alien roared from under the ship, swinging a metal rod toward Ethan's legs. Ethan jumped back just in time, firing again. The fight spilled across the dock, the sound of energy blasts and metal strikes ringing through the air. Shadows danced under the flickering dock lights. Ethan moved fast, using crates for cover. But every second he was out here was a second the ship's engines were warming without him. From inside the ship, the girl crawled to the cockpit, peeking over the dashboard. She saw the engine power level climbing slowly. Her gaze darted to a secondary switch, a manual override she seemed to recognize. Without thinking, she flipped it. Speeding up the warm-up process outside, Ethan ducked as a plasma blade sliced the air above him, the heat brushing his cheek. He rolled to the side, fired twice, and saw the heavy-set alien stumble. But before he could press the advantage, the tall alien grabbed him by the jacket and slammed him against a crate. Pain shot through his back, but Ethan swung the butt of his blaster into the alien's jaw. Breaking free, he heard the sound of the ship's engines roaring to life. Ethan's eyes widened. She had done something inside. The girl's voice suddenly rang out from the ship's speaker system. "Come now." Ethan sprinted toward the side ramp, the tall alien lunging after him. The heavy one tried to grab his leg, but Ethan kicked hard, breaking the grip. He ran up the ramp just as the tall alien's claws swiped at the edge, missing by inches. Ethan hit the ramp control and the door sealed shut with a heavy thud. "Hang on," he shouted, racing to the pilot's seat. The girl had already strapped herself into the co-pilot's chair, her small hands gripping the armrests. Ethan pulled the throttle, the ship rising off the dock with a deep, vibrating hum. Below, the two aliens shouted curses. their figures shrinking as the ship climbed into the night sky. But the relief was short-lived. A red light blinked on the console pursuit, warning. Ethan glanced at the radar. 2 small dots appeared. Growing closer. They have ships, he said grimly. The girl's voice was quiet but steady. We can't outrun them in open space. Ethan gave a short nod, pulling the ship into a sharp turn. Weaving through the maze of metal towers and neon signs that lit the city below. The enemy ships followed, their engines glowing bright in the night. Blaster fires streaked past the cockpit, explosions lighting up the dark. Ethan jerked the controls. Dodging between 2 massive cargo haulers, the girl held onto the seat, her eyes fixed ahead. They'll try to corner us, she warned. Ethan smirked faintly. Then we don't give them the chance. He cut sharply down into a narrow industrial tunnel, the ship scraping sparks against the metal walls. The enemy ships hesitated for a split second before diving in after them. The tunnel twisted and turned, each corner barely wide enough for Ethan's ship to fit. The girl glanced at the radar. They're still there. Ethan spotted a split in the tunnel ahead. He angled the ship toward the left side, then at the last second, cut the thrusters and drifted into the right side instead. The 2 enemy ships shot past the fork, missing the turn. Gotcha, Ethan muttered. Pushing the engines back to full, the ship burst out of the tunnel into open sky. For a moment, the stars spread wide before them. The girl exhaled slowly, leaning back in her seat. Ethan glanced at her. You did good back there, he said. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, a faint, uncertain smile touched her lips. But far behind them, on the radar, the 2 dots reappeared. They were slower now, but they weren't giving up. The ship's engines hummed steadily as Ethan kept his eyes on the radar. The 2 red dots still followed far behind, moving like patient predators. They're not chasing fast anymore, the girl said quietly. They're waiting for us to make a mistake. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. They think we'll run out of places to hide. The city lights below began to fade as they flew over the darker outskirts. Large, rusted structures stood like skeletons of forgotten factories. The wind rattled loose panels, and thin beams of moonlight cut through broken rooftops. This area's dead, Ethan muttered. No patrols. No traffic. The girl shifted in her seat, her gaze scanning the ground. Sometimes dead places hide doors, she murmured. Ethan gave her a questioning glance. What kind of doors? Ones no one uses anymore, she said, her voice low but certain. They used to store stolen goods here. There might be a way underground. The radar beeped, a warning that the enemy ships were closing the gap again. Ethan cursed under his breath, pushing the ship lower. The shadow of a massive collapsed warehouse loomed ahead. Hold on, he said, banking hard to the right and dropping toward the broken roof. The ship's landing struts touched down with a rough thud, sending dust swirling through the air. Ethan powered down the main engines, keeping only a low hum for a quick restart. He grabbed his blaster and motioned for the girl to follow. Her thin legs trembled as she stood, but there was a spark of alertness in her eyes now. They stepped out into the cool, musty air of the warehouse. Moonlight spilled through the gaps in the roof, illuminating piles of scrap metal and old crates. The girl moved ahead without hesitation, weaving between the piles like she had walked here before. Ethan followed, scanning the shadows for movement. She stopped suddenly beside a wall half covered in rust and moss, her small hand pressed against a faint outline of a square panel. Here, she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, running his fingers along the cold metal. At first, it felt solid, but when he pushed harder, the panel shifted with a soft click. The section of wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Leading down, a faint smell of stale air drifted out. Ethan looked back toward the sky through the broken roof. The distant hum of engines was getting louder. They're coming, he said, his voice tense. Without another word, they slipped inside, pulling the panel closed behind them. The darkness was almost complete until Ethan switched on a small wrist light. The beam revealed rusted steps leading. Deeper underground, every step creaked under their weight, the sound echoing faintly through the narrow space. The girl moved ahead with quiet certainty. "This used to be a smuggler's route," she explained softly. "They hid things here when patrols came." Her voice had a strange mix of knowledge and sadness. Ethan didn't ask how she knew. He could guess it wasn't a happy memory. They reached the bottom, where a long corridor stretched into the shadows. Pipes lined the walls, dripping occasionally into shallow puddles. Ethan kept his blaster ready, his other hand guiding the girl forward. Somewhere above, the muffled roar of engines passed overhead. The hunters were searching, but for now, the hidden door had bought them time. They walked for several minutes, until the corridor split into two paths. The girl pointed left, but Ethan hesitated. "Why that way?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Because the other path is a dead end and a trap." Ethan didn't question further. They took the left path, the air growing cooler as they moved deeper. Soon, they reached a small chamber with old crates stacked high. The girl sat on one of them, her breathing heavy. "You need rest," Ethan said, lowering himself to sit opposite her. For a moment, there was silence except for the slow drip of water. Then the girl spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Lyra." Ethan nodded. "Ethan," he replied. Her lips curved slightly, almost like she was trying to remember how to smile. But the moment was cut short by a distant, metallic clang. Ethan's head snapped toward the corridor they had come from. The sound came again, closer this time. "They found the door," Lyra said, her voice tightening. Ethan stood, checking his blaster charge. "We need to move." They slipped out through another narrow exit at the back of the chamber. The passage beyond was smaller, forcing Ethan to duck as they hurried through. The walls here were rough stone instead of metal. Lyra glanced over her shoulder. "There's another way out. But it's dangerous." Ethan gave a faint grin. "Dangerous is fine, dead is worse." They pressed on, the sound of footsteps echoing faintly behind them. The hunters were in the tunnels now. Finally, Lyra stopped beside another hidden panel. This one made of stone slabs. She pressed a loose rock, and the wall shifted open to reveal moonlight. Ethan stepped through first, scanning the area. They were in a narrow canyon outside the city limits. The air was cold, the ground covered in dust and scattered rocks. Lyra stepped out beside him, the panel sliding shut behind them. Ethan looked up at the sky, clear, quiet, no sign of ships for now. But he knew they wouldn't be safe for long. Lyra met his gaze. "We'll have to keep moving," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then we move, and together." They slipped into the shadows of the canyon, disappearing into the night. The canyon was silent except for the crunch of their footsteps on loose stones. Above them, the night sky stretched wide, full of cold, distant stars. Ethan kept scanning the shadows, his blaster loose in his grip. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked to Lyra. Walking just a step behind him, she moved carefully, her thin frame still wrapped in his old coat. The fabric trailed over her knees, hiding the worst of the bruises on her legs. Her eyes were alert. But there was a stiffness in the way she walked, like someone who had learned to expect pain with every step. Ethan slowed his pace, letting her catch up. "We can rest for a bit," he said, nodding toward a cluster of rocks that could hide them from view. Lyra hesitated, glancing around before sitting down on one of the stones. Ethan sat opposite her, the cold air carrying the faint smell of dust and metal. He set his blaster on his knee, ready to grab it if needed. For a while, they sat in silence. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You knew where that hidden door was." Lyra's gaze dropped to the ground, her voice soft. I was kept there once. Ethan leaned forward slightly. The smugglers. She nodded, her fingers clutching the edge of the coat tighter. They brought me through those tunnels when I was younger. I don't remember how long I was there. Only that it was dark and cold, and no one came for me. Her voice trembled on the last words, but she kept talking when I was sold again. I thought maybe it would be better, but it never was. Ethan listened without interrupting. She finally looked up, her eyes reflecting both pain and a strange defiance. No one ever helped me before. She said, not until you. Ethan gave a faint smile. I didn't do much. Her head shook firmly. You stopped. You saw me. That's more than anyone else ever did. For a moment. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he stood and offered her a small ration pack from his belt. Eat something, it'll help. She opened it carefully, nibbling at the dry but filling food. Her hands shook, either from cold or from old habit, while she ate. Ethan scanned the ridge above them. The silence was too perfect. He had been hunted enough times to know when quiet meant danger. His gaze caught a faint glimmer high up on the canyon wall, like the reflection of light on metal. Lyra. He said calmly, we need to move again. She was on her feet instantly, without question. She followed as Ethan led them along the canyon floor. The ground sloped downward, leading into a winding path between towering cliffs. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until only the starlight above guided them. After several minutes, they reached a narrow opening in the rock. Ethan slipped inside first, checking for threats. It was a small hollow, sheltered from above and invisible from the main canyon. We can rest here for a short while, he said. Lyra sat, leaning against the stone wall, her eyes still scanning the shadows. Despite her exhaustion, Ethan sat beside her. Lyra, he said after a moment, do you trust me? She glanced at him, her expression guarded. I want to, she admitted, but trust is something I forgot how to give. He nodded slowly, understanding. Fair enough, he said. Then I'll earn it. Her gaze softened slightly, but before she could answer, a faint thud echoed through the canyon outside. Ethan froze. Every muscle tense. Another sound followed, soft, deliberate footsteps. He moved to the hollow's edge, peering out. Two figures were moving along the canyon floor below, even in the dim light. He recognized the tall alien's red eyes. They were sweeping the area, searching methodically. Ethan slid back into the shadows of the hollow. They're here, he whispered. Lyra's face paled, but she didn't panic. Instead, she reached for something under the cotan, old curved piece of alien metal with strange markings. What's that? Ethan asked quietly. A tool, she said, and a weapon if I need it. They crouched in silence as the footsteps grew closer. Ethan could hear the low murmur of alien voices. One of them laughed, a cruel, taunting sound that echoed through the canyon. They're enjoying this, Ethan muttered. Lyra's jaw tightened. They think we're weak, she said. They're wrong. The shadows outside shifted, and the glow of red eyes passed just beyond the hollow. Ethan's hand gripped his blaster tightly, ready to fire if they looked inside. But the hunters kept moving, their steps fading slowly into the distance. Only when the sound was gone did Ethan exhale. That was close, he said. Lyra nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. You didn't leave me, she said quietly. Most would have. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. I told you I'll earn your trust. For the first time, she gave him a small but genuine smile. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something stronger than either of them realized. Above them, the stars shifted as the night grew colder, somewhere in the distance. The hunters were still searching, but for now, in the small hollow of the canyon. Ethan and Lyra had a fragile moment of safety. Asterisk, the cold night air cut through the canyon like a knife. Ethan and Lyra had been moving for hours. Staying close to the rock walls, the sound of pursuit had faded earlier, but Ethan knew better than to think they were safe. Predators didn't give up, they waited for the right moment to strike. The narrow path they followed opened into a wider space. The ground was flat here, littered with broken stones and the skeletons of old machinery. Ethan stopped, scanning the area. "This feels wrong," he murmured. Lyra stepped up beside him. Her eyes narrowing. "They've been hurting us," she whispered, "pushing us here." A sudden metallic clang echoed from behind. Ethan spun around. Two shapes blocked the path they had just come from. The tall alien with glowing red eyes and the heavy-set one in spiked armor. Both carried weapons that caught the moonlight. The tall one smiled, a slow, confident grin. "Nowhere left to run. Human," he said. Ethan's grip tightened on his blaster. Lyra stepped closer to him, her hand gripping the curved alien tool she carried. "You can still leave," Ethan said coldly. "You walk away, and we forget this ever happened." The heavy-set alien laughed, his voice booming in the canyon. "We don't leave without her, and you. We'll take alive for a while." From the shadows on the far side of the clearing, two more figures emerged. Ethan's stomach sank. There were 4 of them now. They moved slowly, spreading out to trap him and Lyra in the middle. Ethan glanced at her. "No more running," he said. Lyra nodded once, her expression fierce despite her thin frame. The first alien rushed forward, swinging a heavy blade. Ethan sidestepped, firing his blaster at close range. The bolt struck the alien's shoulder, spinning him around with a snarl. The second attacker came from the right, but Lyra darted forward. Her curved tool flashed in the dim light, striking the alien's leg. The alien howled, stumbling back. Ethan's eyes widened. She moved faster than he expected. The tall alien leaped in, claws slashing toward Ethan's chest. Ethan blocked with his forearm, pain shooting through him, but he didn't falter. He shoved the alien back and fired again, forcing him to retreat. The heavy-set alien charged from the front, his spiked armor making him look like a living battering ram. Ethan rolled to the side, blasting at the armor's joints. Sparks flew, and the alien roared in frustration. Lyra kept moving, striking quickly, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. She used the terrain to her advantage, ducking behind broken machines and leaping out to attack. Ethan noticed how her strikes were precising me for weak spots. It was clear now she had fought before, even if she didn't want to talk about it. The 4 attackers regrouped, circling again. Ethan's blaster hummed as it recharged. He could feel his breathing getting heavier, his muscles burning. Lyra was panting too, her eyes darting between enemies. "They'll rush us all at once next time," Ethan said under his breath. "Then we make it count," she replied. When the attack came, it was fast and brutal. 2 rushed Ethan. 2 went for Lyra. Ethan ducked under a swing, slamming his blaster into the tall alien's ribs before firing point blank. The alien crumpled with a cry. The second attacker grabbed Ethan's arm, twisting hard. Ethan gritted his teeth, driving his elbow into the alien's jaw, breaking free. Lyra fought with a mix of desperation and precision. She slashed across one alien's forearm, then spun low to cut the back of his knee. The alien fell, snarling, trying to grab her, but she slipped away like smoke, darting back toward Ethan. The heavy-set alien roared, charging at both of them. Ethan and Lyra moved in sync, fired at the armor's exposed side while Lyra struck low. The impact made the alien stagger. Falling to one knee, breathing hard, Ethan aimed his blaster at the last standing attacker. "End it now," he warned. The alien looked between them, growled, and finally took a step back. But Ethan knew that step was not surrender. It was a signal from the cliffs above. The sound of engines roared to life. Searchlights swept across the canyon, and the hum of a dropship filled the air. Ethan's heart sank. They weren't just hunters, they had backup. The tall alien still clutching his wounded side. Sneered, "You can't fight the sky," he taunted. Ethan looked at Lyra. "'Kay." Her eyes held the same fire they had when he first saw her in the cage. "We can fight enough." "To get out," she said. The dropship descended. Dust and wind whipping through the canyon. Ethan raised his blaster. "Then we stand," he said. His voice steady. The light from above turned the canyon into a battlefield, once again, and together. They prepared to face whatever came next. The dropship searchlights bathed the canyon in blinding white. Dust swirled around Ethan and Lyra, the roar of the engines drowning out all other sounds. The hunters regrouped, weapons ready, their shadows stretching long against the canyon walls. Ethan's grip on his blaster tightened, his eyes locked. On the nearest attacker, Lyra crouched beside him, her curved tool glinting faintly in the harsh light. The wind from the dropship whipped her hair into her face, but she didn't flinch. "They want us alive," she said over the noise. "That's their mistake." Ethan smirked faintly, despite the danger. "Then let's make them regret it." The first hunter lunged. But Ethan fired before he could close the gap. The energy bolt hit center mass. Sending the alien sprawling, Lyra darted forward, striking another's weapon hand. Forcing him to drop his blade, the heavy-set alien roared in frustration. Charging at Ethan like a living, battering ram, Ethan sidestepped, letting the alien crash into a jagged rock. Above, the dropship shifted position. Lowering toward the canyon floor, a ramp began to descend, and more figures appeared inside. Ethan's heart pounded too many for them to fight head-on. He grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the far side of the canyon. "We need to move now." The ground there sloped upward into a narrow crack between two cliffs. It was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Ethan shoved Lyra ahead, firing over his shoulder to keep the hunters back. The air in the narrow gap was cooler, the light from the dropship struggling to reach them. They emerged into a small, hidden clearing surrounded by high rock walls. A rusty metal hatch lay half buried in the dirt. Lyra's eyes widened. "I know this," she said breathlessly. "It leads to the old transport tunnels." Ethan knelt, wiping away the dirt and pulling the hatch open. A wave of stale, cold air hit them. They climbed down the narrow ladder, closing the hatch above them just as blaster fire struck the rocks outside. The tunnel was dark, except for Ethan's wrist light. Old cables hung from the ceiling, and the floor was uneven with years of neglect. But Lyra moved with purpose, guiding them deeper. Ethan followed, the echo of their footsteps fading into the silence. After several minutes, the tunnel sloped upward. They reached a rusted metal door, its surface covered in strange alien markings. Lyra placed her hand on one of the symbols and pressed with a groan of ancient hinges. The door swung open to reveal the night sky, but this time, instead of canyon walls, the view stretched out over an empty plain. Far on the horizon, faint lights marked the edge of another settlement. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in hours. "We're out," he said quietly. Lyra stepped out beside him, her gaze sweeping across the open land. The wind here was gentler, carrying the scent of dry grass instead of dust and metal. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lyra turned to him, her voice soft. "You could have left me." Back in the market, in the canyon, even here, Ethan shook his head. Wasn't an option. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "I don't remember the last time anyone chose me," she whispered. Ethan reached into his jacket. Pulling out a small communicator, he activated it, sending a coded signal to his ship's autopilot. "If we keep moving, the ship will meet us halfway," he said. Lyra nodded, falling into step beside him as they started across the plain. The stars above were brighter here, unbroken by city lights. Ethan glanced at her, noticing how her shoulders were no longer hunched in fear. "You know," he said quietly, "you're not just surviving anymore." Lyra looked at him with a puzzled tilt of her head. "You're living now," he added. They walked in silence for a while, their shadows stretching long in the moonlight. Somewhere far behind them, the hunters would realize they'd lost their prey. But by then, Ethan and Lyra would be gone. They had crossed the line between hunted and free. When the faint hum of Ethan's ship reached their ears, Lyra slowed her steps. She looked at him, her voice almost uncertain. "What happens now?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Whatever you want, Lyra, you're free to choose." Her eyes softened, and she looked ahead toward the approaching ship for the first time. Her voice carried something stronger than fear-hope. "Then I choose to stay." "With you," she said. Ethan didn't reply with words, just a nod. The decision needed no more than that. The ship descended, kicking up dust around them. The ramp lowered, and warm light spilled out. Ethan placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder, guiding her forward. As they stepped aboard, the ramp closed behind them, sealing away the dangers of the night from the cockpit. The view of the plane and the distant stars filled the window. Ethan set the course for deep space, away from the reach of those who had hunted them. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the stars grow brighter as the engines roared. She turned to Ethan, her voice steady. "Everyone gave up on me, but you didn't." He glanced at her, his voice calm. "Never will." The stars stretched into lines as they jumped to hyperspace, and together they left the past behind, heading toward a future neither of them could yet imagine.